Good morning and welcome everybody again to Mount Zion. Our Sunday school lesson this week, we're in Genesis. We're looking at chapters 30 through 33. The title for this chapter, this section is Rachel and Leah. So we're talking about Jacob's wives in this. But it mentions in a first look that change is the unforgiving constant of life. And I know we've all seen enough in our life to know that that is very true. There's a lot of people that say they don't like change. Well, you might as well, because it's going to happen. It says we live from day to day as the days fade into years. We may think that life is settled, but no matter how long we've been in one situation, there are changes in our future. We look forward to sometime in the future when everything's going to be smooth and rosy, and we'll just be able to sit back and relax, and that day will never come. There's things going on. There's change in our lives, and we have to be accepting of that. And Jacob had left. He had left his home. He had left Canaan. He had left the promised land, the land that had been given to him and his family by God, and he left with nothing but a stick in his hand. He didn't have anything but the clothes on his back and a staff. And now he's spent 20 years in Bethuel, living with Laban, married his daughters, living with his uncle, living with family. But he'd been there for 20 years. But he knew where his heart was. He knew where he needed to be. And it mentions here that God has a plan for every one of his children. That plan may take many years to fully implement. Jacob worked 14 years to earn the privilege of marrying his two wives. After he decided to go back to Canaan, it was another 6 years during which God made him wealthy enough to return home. We should never become impatient when God does not answer our prayers according to our time schedule. Again, we remind ourselves continually that we're seeking God's will in our lives. And we seek direction and guidance and wisdom, and then we turn around and get frustrated because it's not. We're asking for all these things, and we're not accepting of what God is laying out in front of us. We want all these things, but we want them when we want them. And it seems that continues to get worse in our lives. It seems we get closer and closer every day to people want instant gratification. There's too many things going on I remember it wasn't but 30, 40 years ago, mail order catalogs were a big deal, and had been for years. Think about our grandparents, great-grandparents. Sears was a big deal. You had the catalog, you could order stuff, and I remember ordering hunting stuff from Bass Pro Shops 30, 40 years ago, and you'd fill out the form and you'd stick it in an envelope with a check, mail it in, and 6 to 8 weeks later, you got your stuff. You had to plan ahead, make sure you do it in the springtime if you want it for hunting season. And now we have Amazon Prime, and Walmart's got their thing, and if we don't have it in 2 days, we're upset. A lot of stuff in 1 day. We just, where's it at? And we're sitting there looking at the tracking info on our phone, wondering, why that poor driver went home at 7 o'clock instead of working till 9 to bring me my stuff. But, we want it right now instead of being patient and letting God train us and teach us so that we'll be able to understand all his blessings and to be able to deal with all the blessings that he gives us. So that's what Jacob's had. Jacob's been there for 20 years. We're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 30, the first 13 verses. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah for her handmaid to wife. And Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived, and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with great wrestling have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, a troop cometh, and she called his name Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. So we start off here. You remember this story, I know, and we've read through this to refresh our memory, but Jacob, who was known to deceive folks in his earlier life, had been deceived by Laban, his uncle, his father-in-law, and was expecting Rachel as his wife, wound up with Leah. And then he worked another 7 years for Rachel. So he married Leah and he married Rachel. And Rachel was the one that he truly loved. But Leah was the one that bore him children. And Leah had several sons at this point. Rachel had none, and she gets to the point where she's so aggravated, she just demanded Jacob give her her son or she's just going to die. And of course, then that aggravated him, and he reminded her that it's a blessing from God the children are. It's not something that he was responsible for, that he could do for her. And so she did something that I guess kind of runs in the family. We've heard it before. She said, well, here, take my handmaid and have a son, have a child, looking for a son through, when she made mention, she shall bear upon my knees. That was, again, you remember when we talked about Abraham and Sarah and Hagar having Ishmael, on my knees, meaning that the surrogate mother presents the child as soon as it's born, and then in the first case it was Sarah would be the mother, so you would think of Ishmael, but in this case that would be Rachel's son, being a surrogate by Bilhah. So he did, and they had a son, and then had another son, and there was this competition between these sisters. Leah was fighting for Jacob's love and attention, and she was jealous of Rachel because of Jacob showed her more favor, and Rachel was jealous of Leah because she was having all the sons, and they were continuing. Jacob, he's just sitting here twisting in the wind, I guess, but back and forth. And so then Leah, since she had stopped having children, she gave her maid Zilpah. So now we have Jacob and Rachel and Bilhah, and I even took notes because there's all these names that, we get all mixed up. And then we have Leah and Zilpah. So Jacob's got 4 wives, and he's got children by 3 of them at this point. And we already saw what happened with Abraham and Isaac. With Abraham and Sarah, and then having Isaac and Hagar and having Ishmael, and just 2 kids and 2 wives, and the turmoil that caused. And now we have 4 wives, and we're going to have more children, but at this point I think we're looking at, Leah's about to have some more, so we're up to about 8 or so. Lots of kids running around, lots of mamas. Lots of turmoil. So then Leah started having children again. She wound up with, how many did she wind up with? 6. And Bilhah had 2, and Zilpah had 2. So that'd be 10, and then Rachel's going to wind up with 2. So, yeah. So Leah had 6 sons at this point, and a daughter, Dinah. So Rachel was finally blessed with a child, we'll pick up here in 25 through 27. It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away that I may go unto my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service which I have done thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. So Rachel has a son, Joseph. And so now we have 11 sons and a daughter. And Jacob he's feeling the pull to go home, to go back to the land he's from. And you remember, not only, a lot of time has passed. There's been 14 years have passed at this point. But he left because he was escaping his brother's wrath, Esau. And Esau is probably still there. In his mind, he's liable to still be just stewing and waiting his time. But his father-in-law, his uncle, Laban, told him that he understands, he's got a family and he understands he wants to move back and all that, but he also understands that he's been blessed with Jacob's presence. He understands that God has blessed the entire family with Jacob being there. And he asked him to tarry. He asked him to wait. And so he does 6 years, as a matter of fact. He stays another 6 years. But he's staying for these 6 years because he needs to not only prepare himself mentally, get ready, but he needs to be able to afford to go back. He needs to build up some wealth in order to go back. So he and his father-in-law make this agreement. And Jacob's job was taking care of the herds, being the shepherd, taking care of all the goats and the sheep and you name it, the camel, they had all kinds of livestock. But he was taking care of all the livestock. He was the herdsman. And at that time, it was most all the animals were a solid color when they were born. There were very few that were multicolored, very few that were spotted or streaked or anything. And so Jacob had this proposition for his father-in-law, and he said, how about, we're going to split up the herds. We'll move them 3 days apart. And all of the ones that are born multicolored, spotted or streaked, will be mine. And then all of them that are born to be solid colored will be yours. And of course, knowing historically what had gone on and all that, Laban's just looking at, dollar signs. Because he knows God's going to bless Jacob. And he knows that he's gained him wealth because of this, and he's thinking he's getting the better end of the deal here. He's got the best of this. And so, of course, he agrees to that, showing his greedy, selfish side there. He goes with that. Now, Jacob had had a vision. He had a dream, and God had explained to him just this, matter of fact, and what to do. So he had some steps that he took, more so to kind of just show evidence. You put these rods in these different colors. But what he was doing was things that he had already learned and they knew about. He was taking the healthiest of livestock and breeding those with the other healthy livestock, and he was breeding the multicolored ones, the ones that were spotted and striped, with the solid colored ones, knowing that you're going to have multicolored ones. And it was his job and his responsibility to continue to take care of these herds, and so he was able to manipulate the offspring to benefit himself, and that he did, and his herd grew, and Laban's herd suffered. And Laban's sons saw what was going on, and it upset them as well, because that was their inheritance. They saw money flying out the window. They saw money fixing to travel back to Canaan that they felt should be theirs. And that's what it tells us here, that Laban's selfish heart was revealed. When Jacob was the means of increasing his wealth, Laban was happy to have him with him. Now that Jacob's wealth had increased, Laban's wealth had decreased. Laban no longer looked at Jacob as he once had. Jacob noticed this change, and it confirmed that it was time for Jacob to leave. I've talked to people in the past, knowing when is it time to make a decision, when is it time to make a move. And this person was telling me, well, you'll always feel a push and a pull if it's the right decision, if it's the right thing. And so here we have Jacob feeling the pull from Canaan, his homeland, and he's also now feeling the push from his father-in-law. And so he's decided that it's time to go, which makes a lot of sense on what this person had told me many years ago. The push and the pull. It's right here in God's Word, the exact same thing. And so then we pick up in 32, 27 through 28. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So a lot of stuff happens between him leaving and then this night that Jacob spends. Jacob left without telling anybody. He packed up his family, packed up all his livestock, and they headed out. They were gone for 3 days before Laban ever knew he was gone. And then they went off after him, and it took a total of 7 days to catch up with him. And the first thing Laban was fussing about, Laban had a vision from God along the way, don't mess with Jacob, basically. Now, if God came to one of us and said, don't mess with this person, I think, we wouldn't mess with that person. But Laban wasn't listening. He went on anyway. And so he gets there, and he's complaining that someone stole his gods, his idols, out of his household. Now, at this time, these are just little figurines made out of clay, probably 8-10 inches tall. And, of course, Jacob is a man of God, but these people lived in, this is not necessarily saying that Laban worshipped other gods, which he might have, but these were probably something that was passed down through their family. Laban had been understanding that Jacob's God had blessed him, but these little figurines were looked upon by members of the family as part of their inheritance. And Rachel and Leah are seeing that they're leaving, and one of the things they complain about is they don't have any inheritance. Well, the women really didn't get any inheritance anyway. But Rachel goes in and steals these little figurines for whatever reason. Whether she felt like she was needing some inheritance, whether she felt like she needed something to keep in touch with home, if she just wanted them out of spite, it's really not exactly clear, but she took these. And then when Laban showed up and accused Jacob of stealing these things, he got upset. And he said, search the whole camp. Whoever stole them, take their life. Because, I didn't take them. We didn't take them. But if you find them, whoever's got them, they're yours. You can. And so he searched everyone's tents, and he went through all this stuff. And Rachel had them, and she had hidden them in her saddle on the camel, and she was sitting on it, and she was, I guess, kind of wily, but they searched her tent. Her father comes out, and she just told her, rather than having to get up off the saddle, she just told her father that it was that time of the month, and he turned around and walked off. So that's I guess as men we kind of make light of that, but we also understand that that's not, if a woman I knew a state trooper one time. He pulled a girl over on 67. This was many years. This was back in the 80s. He pulled her over. She was speeding, and he went up to the window and he said, "Did you know you were going so fast?" She said, "I certainly did." She said, "It's that time of the month, and I'm just trying to get home and get away from everybody." And he said, "Go right ahead." That's what this reminded me of. Rachel tells her daddy, and he said, okay, he backed off. And so there's a lot of contention right here, right now, between Laban didn't find his figurines, but the main thing was he wasn't looking for those so much as he was aggravated that Jacob's leaving. He's aggravated that he didn't get a chance to tell all his grandchildren bye, kiss his wives bye. That's what he's saying, that he didn't get to have a party, a big dinner and wish them well and all that. He didn't wish anybody well at this point. He was just being selfish and jealous, and he saw money flying out the window is what he saw. And so Jacob and he were not going to get along too well. So they made this agreement, this covenant between the two of them, and they set up a little stone pillar there, and they agreed not to, each other would not cross that line. You'll stay in your part and I'll stay on my part, and we'll call it good. So he moved on. Jacob's now dealing with thinking about his brother Esau, and he doesn't have any idea what Esau's thinking about him. It's been 20 years. He doesn't realize, in fact, he stole the blessing because he thought his father was about to die. Isaac's still alive. Rebekah's still alive. Esau's still alive. It's been 20 years and they're all still there. And so he's increased in wealth. So the first thing he does is, I'm going to give Esau some gifts. So he sends some of his servants ahead with livestock as gifts to Esau. Well, he sends someone to check on him, and they say that they talk, and then they come back and tell him that Esau's headed this way with 400 men. And he sends these gifts out ahead, and then he decides that I'm going to split up what I've got so that if Esau comes and attacks us, he'll just be attacking one group, and the other, half my family will get away and live. So he did this. He sends them ahead, and then he sends his family over to another area to protect them. And he spends the night by himself in a tent. And that's what the verse here is talking about. Is he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. A man came to Jacob that night, and they wrestled all night. This man was a pre-incarnate form of Jesus. Jesus was there, talking to Jacob. Now, they wrestled all night, and I understand what it says, and it says that Jacob, this is just to make us feel good, because I'm assured in my mind that at any point had Jesus decided that enough was enough, enough would be enough. And that would be the end of it. But he was there to build confidence in Jacob and to help him to understand what lay before him and such. There's no mistake in that Jesus is all powerful and he can do what he wants. It's shown to us at the end when they wrestled all night and he's telling him, basically it's a draw, but he struck Jacob's hip. And he didn't just strike it like touching, which it could have been. I would surmise that he struck his hip to the point where he didn't just touch it and his hip become injured. He injured his hip. He's showing him and showing us that truly who is in charge and who is in. And so he struck Jacob's hip, and he had a limp for the rest of his life because of this. But that stopped the wrestling, that stopped the fight, and that got him to sitting and talking and explaining. And that's what Jacob asked for, was a blessing, actually. And so he asked Jacob his name, not because he didn't know who he was. He asked Jacob his name so that he could tell him and say it out loud, because Jacob basically means deceiver. And that's what Jesus is telling him here, your name's no longer going to be Jacob. You're now going to be named, your name's going to be Israel. And he renames him because he's seen the maturity in spirituality from Jacob. He's seen that Jacob is ready to take up the blessings, to take up and be the head of this family. I mean, he's about to have the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. And he's had 11 of them. He's about to have the 12th. But this is that would have been quite interesting to watch that, to have been able to see that. Because, I mean, again, I just keep going back to they wrestled all night. Well, I mean, it's kind of like, to me, some father wrestling with their 5-year-old son. You know, you let them get you down on the ground, you let them roll around, you let them try, but at any point along the way, you just pick them up with one hand and set them over here, and it's over with. You know, there's never any question as to who's in control. There's never any question as to the outcome of this wrestling match. There's no doubt in our mind or anyone else's that knows Jesus Christ as their Savior that this is just a learning lesson for Jacob. This is just a learning opportunity. This is just God's way of teaching this lesson to him. And that's what we see. And he's not only teaching it to him, but to us as well. So then they go out the next day. It mentions here that Jacob offered a valuable present to Esau and declared that he would meet his brother personally the next day. So he's offered up these gifts. He goes out there in person. Esau tells him, I don't need all these things. That's okay. Jacob says, oh no, they're a gift. I want you to have them. He sees that there's not vindictiveness in his brother Esau's heart. He's not there to attack him. But Esau also says, how about I just leave some guys here with you to help you out. And you come on and you come on with us. They'll bring the on, and we'll head on back home, basically. But Jacob's still just a little bit leery. Of course, I suppose you would when the last time you saw this person, they swore that they were going to kill you, whatever it took. So he said, we've got livestock that's about to have babies. We have to move along slow. Y'all just head on back, and I don't need any help. I've got all my servants. I mean, we made it this far, just us. We'll make it just fine, and we'll be right along after you, just to make sure that everything is as he said. He's just being safe and cautious, and maybe just a wee bit suspicious. So Esau goes on, and Jacob, they actually go on to a different place and set up camp and set up town. But he's made it back to Canaan. That's the bottom line. He's where he needs to be. He's where his family needs to be. With all that has gone on in these 20 years, with all that's going on with his wives and his children, it's just amazing to see God's will working out through all this. I mean, as much as we try to complicate things, as much as Jacob's complicated things, God's will is just moving right along. What God is expecting, what God has promised, it's going to happen. And that's with us as well. We seek God's will. We know what God, we think we know what God's will is. And it doesn't matter what kind of roadblocks we put in the way along the way. God's will is still going to be done. As we mentioned, it doesn't matter who's in charge in Washington, D.C. It doesn't matter who's in Congress. It doesn't matter who sits in the Supreme Court. If it's God's will and it's God's time, it's going to be done. There's a lot to answer for. There's a lot we're going to have to answer for. I'm not talking politics one way or the other. I'm just saying we're all have things wrong from time to time. There's lots of turmoil going on right now in our country and all around the world. But it just leads us closer and closer. I mean, every day we're one day closer to Jesus' return. And that's what we need to be excited about. That's what we need to be focused on. We don't need to be worried about and scared to death about what's going on today. I talked to a guy this week, and he was talking to his daughter, who's 40 years old and has 3 kids, and her words basically were, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do? I mean, she's thinking the sky's falling. And, she thinks that in another week that the whole world's going to come to an end. Her whole world's going to come to an end. And the thing is, we get up every day and thank God for the opportunities that He's put in front of us that day. Thank God that He's given us one more day to do something for Him, in His honor and in His glory. Thank Him for, this chance. This little chance. I mean, this opportunity. There's no way we can pay back to God what He's done for us. But to know that He thinks enough of us, not only to send His Son to die on the cross for us, but He thinks enough of us that we can be a party to His will being done here in Malvern, Arkansas. In Arkansas, in the United States of America, on this earth, that He thinks enough of us that He's got something for us to do. And, we don't need to worry about what are we going to do now, what's going to happen. God's going to lay it right there in front of us. Well, as long as we're seeking His will, He's going to give us the tools that are necessary. He's going to give us the opportunity. And as I said last week, if all it is a fork, then that's enough. If whatever God has given us is enough to do what He wants us to do today, it's enough for us to do our part that He's laid out there. In the final word here, it says, when he returned to Canaan, Jacob had grown materially and spiritually. When he first desired to return to his home, he was practically a servant to his father-in-law. You remember Jacob mentioned that his father-in-law had changed his wages 10 times during these 14 years when he was paying off his debt to marry the 2 daughters. And it didn't mean he changed his wages 10 times and gave him a raise. It means he changed his wages 10 times to cut out his portion. And that's why he was needing some time to build up to where he had enough to move the whole family back to Canaan. By following the specific instructions of God, Jacob became wealthy during the next few years. When he finally returned to Canaan, he was forced to deal with the family problems that he left behind when he fled to Bethuel. He faced these old troubles with wisdom and prayer, and God was with him. We can run away from our problems, but they will be waiting for us when we go back home. Well, that's the thing. We think we're getting away from problems. We think we can turn our back on something. We think we can ignore something. Put it in a box and put it away in the dark, and there's going to be a time when that has to be opened back up. We won't get away from our problems. We need to just face them right here and right now. When Jacob came back into the land, Isaac, Rebekah, and Esau were all still alive. By the grace of God and the providence of God, Jacob, now named Israel, was able to resolve his conflicts and take his place as the successor to the promises made to his grandfather Abraham. Israel was not free from all problems, and he would face many personal troubles in the days ahead. However, he had learned the important lessons. When trouble comes, he must turn everything he had over to the Lord and follow His instructions completely. God can and will deliver us when we will dedicate ourselves to fulfilling the plan God has for our lives. That's just something that we need to remind ourselves every day. We all know that. But if we'll dedicate each day to fulfilling the plan that God has for us that day, we'll be blessed that day. And the next day that he allows us to wake up and put our feet on the floor, we do the same thing. And then the same thing the next day. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, we look forward to a day when we can just sit back and relax and everything will all be great. That's not what we're here for. We're here to help fulfill God's will. That's what we can look forward to. If we start doing this each and every day, we look back and see how God blessed us by allowing us to be a part of his plan. And then we will look each day and look forward to our future as to just how is God going to use me this week in his plan, this month, this year. How's God going to use me when I retire? Because I'm not going to sit back in a rocking chair and just watch the sun rise and set every day. I'm going to have more time to do something for God. He's going to have more for me to do. How great's that going to be? You know, if we'll start one day, then we'll build up, and that's what we'll be looking forward to. We won't be looking forward to our time. We'll be looking forward to God's time. Just to know that we can start changing our heart right here, right now, just a little bit each and every day. With that, I'd like for us to go, Lord, in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you today thankful to study your word, thankful that you gave us your word, thankful that your Son, Jesus Christ, died on the cross for each and every one of us. Thankful that we simply have to accept what he did for us, to know that then we'll be a part of your plan. Thankful for each and every day that you give us to know that all we have to do is seek your will, and you've got something out there in store for us to bring honor and glory to you. And just to know that we can be a small part of that is so exciting. I just pray that you continue to bless this church as the church does just that. Seeks out in our community, in areas that we can minister to our community. And I pray, Lord, for our country, that we understand that it's your will that we're seeking, and your will be done. I just pray, Lord, for everyone to understand that. I ask forgiveness where I fail you. In your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.